This is Dion Blumenrader with Big Hoss One Sauce, and you're listening to the best show on all things barbecue with my man, Greg Rempe.
You're listening to KCBS, all the barbecue hits, all the time. All the time. Or mostly on time.
And it's time for a KCBS weather break. It's currently 62 degrees outside. It might be 72 degrees. We're not exactly sure. Let me check. Shit. We have no idea. So let's split the difference and go with 67. Yes, it's definitely 67 at KCBS. We think.
Let's go!
We'll do it live. Okay. Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
So to get that perfect barbecue, you use wood. Are you sure it's safe? Whatever. We put the lighter fluid on, strike your match, and... Oh! Should we call the fire department? That might be a good idea.
And welcome to the really big Barbecue Central show. This is the show where we talk about all things that are important in the world of barbecue and grilling. The show originating from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame city, Bomb City, USA, Cleveland, Ohio, the barbecue capital of the North Coast. I am your program host, Greg Rempe. Happy to have you aboard here on your Tuesday evenings live fire fun and frivolity show. If you want to get in contact with the show, follow me during off-show hours. Here's how you do all that stuff.
You can get in touch with the show by sending an email to Greg at BBQCentralShow.com. Follow us on all the social media channels at BBQ Central Show. And be sure to subscribe to the show podcast feed on your favorite podcast platform.
Anything else you want to find out about the show can be found at the main website, thebbqcentralshow.com. And here's what's happening in case you get the newsletter. Typically, in a second Tuesday of the month, you will find the first hour being taken up by number 1, Meathead from AmazingRibs.com, number 2, Robert Moss from RobertFMoss.com. But since we have recently put in a 2023 class of Barbecue Central Show Guest Hall of Fame members, what do we do when we put in a new class? We reach out to the new class. We bring them in for what? The origin stories. And first up for the origin stories here this evening is the second Tuesday of the month, regular guest in the first hour, 35 past segment, Robert F. Moss. So Meathead has relinquished his normal segment. We'll do the first hour with Robert Moss, and we'll do the deep dive origin story that you've come to know and love. We'll learn all about Robert from when he was born and how it has progressed to where the career is today, so looking forward to that. And then we will move to the second hour where we will have a longtime sponsor of the show, a person who steers the ship of a company that builds some of the most prolific and sexy barbecue pits out there. Ryan Zabril joins us on the show. Ryan Zaboril joins me on the show. What the hell is wrong? So we'll get the status of 2023, how fiscal year has looked like for him, especially compared to the last couple of years. We'll take a peek into the first half of next year, overarching goals for 2024, new products, trends in the industry that he might be seeing. So Ryan Zaboril in the second hour leading off and then closing out the show. It's been 7 years since we had him on the first time. Big shot now, big shot back then. The pitmaster of Heath Riles Barbecue, Heath Riles, joins the show. That's a huge hammer out of the bullpen. The last time I talked to Heath Riles, he was Victory Lane Barbecue branded. He has since gone through a tremendous rebrand, really hit the rub, sauce, products market. He had all of those. Now he's added more. Now he's gone through the rebrand, so we'll talk about all of that. He now has a YouTube channel, of course, which you know about, and he's launched a podcast, what might be 30, 40 episodes or so. So really getting the social media aspect of things and all the digital media platforms to try and help promote and grow that brand, do the digital storytelling, what have you. So really excited to catch up with Heath Riles as he closes the show. So that's how it sets up tonight. Robert Moss in the first hour with the origin story, and then Ryan Zaboral from Pits and Spits, Heath Riles from Heath Riles Barbecue closing out the show. Don't forget you can follow me socially, Instagram, X, TikTok, and Snapchat at BBQ Central Show. And we say good evening to those of you watching tonight through one of the video streaming platform options. You can do it through Facebook and Twitch/BBQ Central Show. You can also watch over on YouTube, which is youtube.com/@BBQ Central Show, where we do have a new YouTube poll question of the week. And I'm asking everybody this, including all guests. Even if money wasn't a factor, you prefer prime beef over Wagyu. And currently, we are at a deadlock of 50-50. 50% of you saying, yes, you prefer prime over Wagyu. And 50% of you saying, no, you do not prefer prime over Wagyu. For me, gun to head, I'm going prime over Wagyu, especially if I'm able to source it myself. That's just my flavor profile. That's just my palate. But we are deadlocked currently right now, although no's just tipped the scale and they are winning. I'm sorry, no's. That's what I meant to say. So we'll see how it goes through the rest of the show. I'll ask Robert Moss as we lead off the origin story, and then we'll also ask Ryan and Heath in the second hour, and I'll do my best to give you an update at the end of the show and throughout the show, of course. So let's start here this evening. I'm not going to break down the Rod Gray interview from last week in gory detail. The interview, no doubt, solidifies one of two things. One, you think he's doing a great job handling the American Royal situation, or two, there's a lot of talking and not a lot of discernible information being put out as to how this isn't going to be an issue going forward. So whatever side of the fence that you fall on, I mostly hope that you enjoyed the extended segment with Rod Gray last week. I certainly appreciate that he hang in there for basically an hour and fielding those questions. Quick correction on my part from last week. I did ask Rod during the questioning why there was no lead reps put in place this year, but after re-listening to the other shows, he did indeed say that there were lead reps at this event. That was my mistake. And I've spent a lot of time listening to the segment that we did over the course of the week. I've also read through a lot of comments and reactions that folks have sent in. And I want to tie this up with a few summary thoughts. Like many of you, I do think it was odd that Rod said he has no job at the American Royal and that he pushes a broom and picks up trash. I did find that odd. But if that's the case, and he's not allowed to have anything to do with the inner workings of the contest, then I'm going to take him at his word. I don't know the ins and outs of a contest or what the CEO is responsible for at contests, and evidently it's nothing to do with the inner workings of said contest. However, I do know that the American Royal is the Kansas City Barbecue Society's the biggest event and biggest customer each year. I also know how business is run. So even if there's nothing for him to do as relates to the contest, which, again, we all kind of think is odd, there are numerous and valuable things for a CEO to do at the contest that doesn't involve the intricacies of running the contest itself. For instance, hanging out with the folks at the American Royal and building deeper relationships with them. The Royal probably has their sponsors attending the event. Why not help them build even more value to their sponsors? Maybe those sponsors could cross over and sponsor the KCBS in some way. I'm sure the CEO position has some responsibility in securing sponsorship business over the course of a fiscal year. To that end, I'm sure the KCBS sponsors are also attending the Royal. why not stay at least as long as they stay and deepen those relationships as well, and doing it in person? Maybe there's an opportunity to mine those sponsors on information for new sponsors that also might be interested in coming on board with the KCBS and a potential sponsorship opportunity. Of course, you have the public relations piece that I mentioned last week during the interview. And I understand Rod said he doesn't want to steal the spotlight from anybody, but I don't think anyone's thinking that the CEO is stealing anything from them. Perhaps just the opposite. I think they would really appreciate being able to memorialize their achievement with a photo of the top rank official there at KCBS. I mean, everybody loves being in pictures with important people. By the way, doing the PR stuff also yields social media content, a lot of it. And it's all evergreen stuff that can be reused year after year after year. I'm sure the social media person would love to have access to that kind of content to post on all of their social media platforms. How about this? Toss out everything I just mentioned. Let's focus on this specific contest. You have the biggest convergence of KCBS members and potential KCBS members in one location for an extended weekend. Why not spend every second you can with your membership? Ask them what's working, what's not working, what would you like to see improved, tweaked, adjusted. Meet as many members as you can, and maybe some of those members have non-members in tow. You have the opportunity now to gain new members in what I would call a warm environment instead of a cold call situation. So why not take advantage of that opportunity to try and grow the membership at that event specifically, while also building deeper relationships with the current membership? It's a win-win. So indeed, maybe there is nothing the CEO can do within the workings of the contest, but there's plenty to do outside of that. And yes, I reaffirm my answers from last week. I don't compete. I'm not a certified barbecue judge. Henceforth, I have never tabulated a contest in my life. And I get the point that Rod was trying to make last week. And maybe my thoughts aren't as relevant as I think they are, or they did show my lack of knowledge on that topic. But I can tell you this. For as ignorant as I might be on that particular topic, I do know what a plane wreck looks like, and what happened at the Royal was a plane wreck. And to double down with I would bring the same team to the Royal next year, in my opinion, borderline reckless. You would really trot the same team back out there next year after what happened this year? That is a bold statement. Bold. In any event, that puts a bow on this topic. I'm sure it's not the last time we will talk about it here on the show. And I am certainly anxious, as I'm sure many of you are, to see what happens over the course of the year as we build into the 2024 version of the American Royal, and we'll see how that goes. All right, my pal Robert Moss, a new 2023 Barbecue Central Show's guest Hall of Famer, is in the green room. And he is ready to rock. Before we get into that, are you tired of settling for mediocre grilling experiences? It's time to step up your game and bring the ultimate flavor and cooker to the backyard barbecues. Pits and Spits charcoal grills offer the highest quality live fire cooking experience you can get in the market today. Using either wood or charcoal, their solid fuel grills produce those classic flavors for when you have the time to fire up the grill and cook for family and friends. With a large adjustable fuel tray, you can raise and lower the fire to control and fine-tune the heat. This is their take on the very popular Santa Maria style grill. Check them out online, pitsandspits.com/BBQ Central Show. That's pitsandspits.com/BBQ Central Show. By the way, all spelled out. And the Pits and the Spits is spelled with the double T on the Pits and the Spits. By the way, if you want to save $150 off a charcoal grill purchase, use promo code Charcoal Central, all one word, Charcoal Central at checkout, and you can save exactly $150 off any charcoal grill for sale. Once again, it's pitsandspits.com/BBQ Central and promo code Charcoal Central for that discount of $150 off a charcoal grill at Pits and Spits. Origin story time. We're back at it with our monthly guest, Robert Moss. Stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the BBQ Central Show. Broadcasting live from the BBQ Central Show studios in Cleveland, Ohio. You're listening to the BBQ Central Show. Once again, here's your host, Greg Rempe.
Well, welcome back. This portion of the show being brought to you by cookinpellets.com, your number one source for quality wood pellets for all your pellet-driven cookers. Visit cookinpellets.com for more information, see what products they offer, and then when it's time to buy, where do I tell you to go? Not cookinpellets.com for great shipping rates, but a same selection of products. You go to amazon.com, lowes.com, or walmart.com. Again, same stuff to buy, just better shipping rates than if you did it on the namesake website. Good folks over at cookinpellets.com. Lining up Chris Becker for an origin story as we speak. My next guest is the contributing barbecue editor for Southern Living Magazine, an accomplished author, restaurant critic, podcast host, and most importantly, as we add things to the introduction titles, 2023 BBQ Central Show's guest Hall of Famer. Of course, we welcome back Robert Moss. Robert, before we dig into the origin story, we do have a YouTube poll question of the week that we need your answer on immediately, if not sooner, and we're asking everybody this. If money wasn't a factor, or even if money wasn't a factor, you prefer prime over Wagyu beef?
Yes, I much prefer prime over Wagyu.
All right. Well, 40% of us agree with you that we prefer prime over Wagyu, but 60% taking it currently. And before we dive into the origin story, do you have any type of acceptance speech that you've worked up here over the last 2-3 weeks to talk about this incredible life achievement that you have been garnered with?
No, I do have the ring, which I have to say is
look at that,
remarkably understated and elegant. So yes. I do really appreciate that. I do sort of think this may be the pinnacle of my career. So I may have pretty much accomplished everything there's left to accomplish in the barbecue world. I did get my Jack ribbon, so I am now a KCBS certified judge. So I did that back in a couple weeks ago. And so I think, what's left now, I've got the Hall of Fame ring. So I think, I can relax for a while.
You got the Cool Whip on top of the whole barbecue career at this point. So good to know. Let's correct. Go ahead and dig into the origin story. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with any of these that we've done in the past over the last handful of years, but we're going to do the deep dive on Robert Moss. So let's start all the way back in the beginning. Where were you born, and when were you born?
I was born in 1970 in Decatur, Georgia. Though I don't remember Decatur. I moved from there when I was 1 year old. But I am a Georgian by birth, and then a South Carolinian for most of the rest of my life.
What was family like for you growing up before you got into high school that you remember?
Well, my father's, he's retired now, but he was a Presbyterian minister. And so we traveled around a good bit, bounced around a good bit when I was young, lived in a couple different small towns in Georgia and South Carolina before we ended up in Greenville. I have two brothers, family is still together. My parents have celebrated their, 50 something, they're over 50 now, anniversary. So for me, at least, a very, stable home life. And once we got to Greenville, at least, I was about 10 years old then I sort of, had that as my hometown. So, I don't think of it as a particularly interesting or remarkable childhood, but I remember, being a pretty good childhood. I don't have a lot of, I have neither great or terrible stories to tell about it.
What kind of a relationship do you recall having with your parents as you're growing up outside of the high school years?
You mean before or after?
Before, yeah.
High school. Oh, before. Gosh, I don't know. I don't think that too much about that time. I had a little more of a, more of a rebellious kid in high school, but I was a pretty, pretty good kid up through, 16, 17. I think like most kids. Did a lot of sports, a lot of activities, and so, let's say I don't have a lot of great stories from the childhood, but a good relationship I think all around with my parents.
You mentioned you had some other siblings in the house. What was your relationship growing up like with them?
We're pretty close in age. My older brother is just a year and a half older than me, and my younger is, I think, two years younger than me. So we were all pretty close together. We had a lot of sibling rivalry. We all played sports and played music, and we're pretty competitive with each other, but in I think a pretty good natured way. So we had a good relationship growing up. We aren't super close now. They all live all over the country, but I see each other. I see them a couple times a year, and we still stay in touch.
What's the high school Robert Moss like? You had mentioned that you got into a little bit of a rebellious stage, and high school can be a little bit of an awkward time for a lot of folks. I mean, you either were popular and you had a great time and they were the best years of your life for some of them, or maybe you were a bit ostracized and you find it hard to fit in. What was it like for you?
I changed a lot in high school, and there are kids who are that way. I changed physically. I think I entered high school probably about 5 foot, maybe 5'2", and 110 pounds, the skinniest, tiniest kid in the class. And my sophomore year, I grew 10 inches in a single year.
Wow.
And ended up being tall and very skinny. So that changed a lot physically there. Same thing. I was very shy and socially, awkward, I think, early in high school, and still, I was still sort of a shy kid, a little bit of a nerdy kid through high school, but started to, I think, blossom a lot more as I got older. Started off not too interested in school and academics, and the more I was in school, in high school, the more interested I got in studying, and as I got deeper into a range of subjects, became much more interested, got much better grades as I went along. Was very much a nerdy kid in middle school. I was a computer programmer back in the old days. Had a TRS-80 color computer, if anybody remembers that. Ran a bulletin board system at my house when I was about 7 years old, or seventh grade, I should say. Back when it was all you had was dial-up modems, and we only had a single phone line, so I could run the bulletin board between, I think, 7 o'clock and 9 o'clock at night. Because if the phone rang, the modem would pick up. Anybody calling us would hear the screech of a modem on it. So that's the sort of I got started in computers very early, read a lot of science fiction and all that. So I was a pretty, science geeky kid. But then in high school, I got much more into literature, and this is relevant to my barbecue writing eventually. Much more reading a lot of novels and reading a lot of different things, and sort of move, started developing more of the humanities side of the brain, I think you would say, and really got it. I had a lot of great teachers in high school, especially junior and senior year in high school, that really inspired me to get into learning. So I think I exited high school very different than I was when I entered it as a freshman.
Were the grades because you knew you were building into having to go into a secondary education, or did you just build an interest? No,
it's more building an interest. I think I was bored when I was younger. I was in middle school, and I think when I got to high school, and then you sort of separate out and you start taking honors and AP classes and all that. I think the more challenging it got, I sort of rose to the challenge. I think it was boring to me early on, so I didn't put much effort into it. But at a certain point, I just enjoyed the subject, whether it was calculus or if it was computer science or it was English or history. And really got into it for its own sake. Was really big into, actually, it's funny now, I was really big into chemistry and physics, and thought initially I was going to be a double physics math major when I went off to college, but things changed quite a bit. But I exited high school very interested in learning on my own terms, and I think I had a good group of friends who, and at the same time, didn't mention the rebellious side. We stayed out, we did things that 18-year-old kids do, and got into a lot of trouble. But at the same time, I was with a group of people who were very serious about music, very serious about books, and and so we sort of mix the fun side of life with the studio side.
What kind of music are you into back then?
Back then, it's hard to say. So I was actually a musician. I played drums all from middle school on. We played in the marching band in high school. Started playing drum set. I was very much I got much more into alt rock kind of stuff when later when I was in college and in grad school. But back then I think I was much more into, well, actually, I guess I was into classic, what we call classic rock now. Got really into folks like the Rolling Stones and a lot of the 60s hippie rock, if you would. Grateful Dead and all that kind of stuff. Back then, and of course that evolved, but I got very much into, and I was even into like a lot of the art rock. Being a drummer, I wanted to hear all those Berkeley School music drummers and studio drummers who were really highly technical. So I really got into sort of geeky music as well.
If I hear somebody has a father that is in the religion business, I immediately start to think, man, it must be a strict household. Got to watch your P's and Q's. Could be mega rebellious. Was he like that, or was he pretty laid back guy?
No, I think people hear preacher's kid and they think, oh gosh, you must have grown up like it's a Presbyterian church. It's pretty mild mannered. It's not a super fundamentalist church. So no, I wasn't raised in a super strict environment, so I didn't have too much to rebel against. Compared to friends of mine who grew up in very religious households. Sort of a very moderate religious household. So I think I got a good moral compass from it, but I didn't feel like I was restrained or restricted.
What's the food scene like in the house as you're growing up?
That's interesting because this was really, we're talking about the 1980s here, and the food scene in America in general is very interesting. At that time, my mom has always been a very good home cook. Cooked lots of things from scratch, and so I grew up having, unlike some of my friends, I grew up having a regular family dinner where my mother cooked most everything herself. Not to say they never opened cans of cream of mushroom soup and stuff like that, but it was pretty good. Made her own bread and that kind of thing. So I think I got a little introduction to good home cooking, I would say, through my parents. And then of course that was the era of fast food chains rising. So, when I was outside the house, my family did not eat out at restaurants a lot, which is an interesting dynamic for me now because I eat out at restaurants all the time. We very rarely, up until I was probably in high school, we very rarely went out to eat dinner. Even if we're traveling somewhere, we would usually pack a picnic lunch to eat along the way instead of stopping off at fast food. I think part of that was because, Presbyterian minister did make a lot of money, so I think part of that was saving money until my father got farther along in the career. But also, I think my mother just had that reflexive reaction against fancy restaurants and all that kind of stuff. So that is one thing I did not grow up with. It was eating at any kind of things that you consider a fancy restaurant or anything like that. So I got lots of good solid home cooking just around the dinner table at home.
Was there any live fire cooking being done or barbecue that would have sparked an interest in
definitely
you?
Not what I would call. Yeah, definitely not what I would call barbecue. No one was. I'm not like a lot of my friends who grew up on farms. They would cook hogs and all that kind of stuff. But we lived in suburban Greenville, South Carolina. So there was no low and slow. There was no pig cooking going on. A lot of grilling though. My grandfather in particular, who died when I was in middle school, but while he was still alive, we would spend a lot of time together, and he was always grilling burgers or steaks or that kind of thing. Used the charcoal chimney, which is where I learned how to use a charcoal chimney early on, and returned to it later when I realized how ridiculous lighter fluid and all that is, and how easy a charcoal chimney is. So a lot of grilling, but not much in the way of barbecue when I was up until I was much older.
After you get through high school, are you pretty much set that you're going to go to college, or did you think about any gap years, or maybe you took a gap year, or was it straight to college?
No, there was no question in my mind that I was going on to college. I wasn't pushed into it. It's just something I wanted to do, but I wanted to get as far away from Greenville as I could. And, college was the easy way to do that. So I was very interested in learning. I wasn't super motivated to apply to all these colleges and do that whole thing. But I knew I was going to end up, going to college. I ended up going to Florida State down in Tallahassee, which was a good 8-hour drive, I think, from Greenville. So it was a good long way away from home, which is what I wanted at the time. And just, hit the ground there. And then you may know, I've spent, I then proceeded to spend the next 12 years or so in academia from then. So I spent many years on college campuses after that.
When you got on the Florida State's campus, what are you studying right off the bat?
Yeah, it was interesting. I went down to Florida State initially, torn to whether I wanted to do computer science, physics, math, or some combination of all that. It was very, very heavy in the sciences. And one of the reasons I ended up at Florida State is at the time they had a big computer science program with a supercomputer and all this kind of stuff. And this was before internet. So I actually had one of the first email accounts at a time when nobody had email accounts. But if you were in the computer science program, you would get one on the big VAX mini computer system. And it was really just been used for, military and academic, sciences discussions. In fact, I had a friend who went to Clemson who was also computer science. He got an email address and we were like emailing each other, trying to say, hey, you want to come down and visit? And we got a nasty note from the administrator saying, this email system is for academic purposes only. So you are not allowed to organize your weekend over email. You can only talk about serious, studious topics. So I was on the internet before there was the World Wide Web, before anybody else had it, and so it was very early on in the computer world. And that was about the first year at Florida State, and then something flipped in me, and I got really bored with all that at some point, and just got really interested in literature again. I took a Russian literature class with just sort of randomly with a really good professor that we read all these weird Russian novels and fell in love with it, and then decided that really what I wanted to do was study literature. And after being away from home for a year and a half, Greenville didn't seem like such a terrible place anymore. So I ended up transferring back to Furman University in Greenville, getting a major in English there. So I got a BA in English and graduated from there in 1992, back in Greenville.
And then you proceed to go on and get a doctorate. Yeah,
the rest of my life from there till at least 10 years later was really not the result of any kind of planning or forethought. I just sort of did what I wanted to do. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I got a Furman, so I waited tables at a restaurant for a little while. I actually graduated a semester early. So I spent a semester just working at a seafood restaurant and trying to figure it out, and said, well, this isn't what I want to do long term. And so I applied for the master's program down at University of South Carolina to study American Lit there. Moved down to Columbia from Greenville, and then spent the next 10 years in Columbia. Liked the master's program. Was enjoying studying. Didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I went on and went into the PhD program, and I went on and was and got to a PhD, almost to the PhD. I finished all my classwork and was ABD, as they call it, which I was working my dissertation. And at that point, decided I really didn't want to go into teaching. I didn't want to be a professor, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And that was in the early days of the .com boom. So I did the natural thing, which is I went back to computers and took my PhD and got a job in the computer industry. Fortunately, I did finish my dissertation and did finish the PhD. But by the time I did, I had this was literally in the era of pets.com and the sock puppet, if you remember, all those fun things. And I got swept up into the .com days and finished PhD, but went into the tech industry, and that's what made my career there up until even today. I mean, a lot of people who know about my writing and barbecue stuff may not realize, but most of my career has been spent in the software world, and I still have my own technology consulting company and do that as my primary line of work even today.
So is the PhD in literature?
Yeah, PhD in American literature. So like I say, it wasn't a well mapped out, thought out plan for how I was going to get from point A to point B. While I was working on my PhD was when the World Wide Web was really first developing and crossing over from academic, from the sciences to the larger academic world. So as I was in the humanities program, I sort of got back into computer programming. I started building websites back when you used to build websites by typing the HTML code and all that. And I at the university helped stage a lot of online scholarship, like putting literary scholarship and things online, which both, which got me back into the the world of computers, where I had been earlier in my life. And I ended up writing my dissertation. I did a hypertext edition of the works of Raymond Chandler, who is the great hardboiled detective novelist. Philip Marlowe is his detective protagonist. And so I did a electronic edition of The Big Sleep. There was a hypertext edition, and wrote a big dissertation about it that is sitting on the shelf still. No one has read it since, but it got me back into the world of software and computers. And so I went back that direction.
I mean, it sounds like you had competing passions, and depending, I'm going to use this loosely, but depending on where the wind was blowing, you were going back into computers, or now I'm going back into the literature thing. Neither being the wrong answer, but it sounds like you're able to take advantage of both. Yeah, it's worked out well. I mean, one thing about being in the technology industry is, it helps if you can program computers, but if you want to get beyond just being an engineer, you also need to be able to talk to people and explain things. And, so you have to sort of use both sides of the brain, which it definitely helped me out. I think the more I can focus on something for a long time, and at some point I'll get tired of it. I'll sort of wear out, and I want to go back to that other area and focus on that over there, which is sort of how I've ended up bouncing back and forth between more of the food writing, history, side of my brain, and then go back and spend a lot of time deep in the technology. So, where does the love story happen for you? Do you mean love story as in like my wife? Yeah. In that, I met my wife at University of South Carolina, and she was like me. Ended up in grad school because she didn't know what she wanted to do with her life. And so we met each other in the English department. She was actually originally getting a master's of English, which is how we met. And she ended up staying in Columbia, and then we sort of, started dating and then got engaged, et cetera. And then she went and worked for a while doing various things. And then she went back to library school. So if you see all the books behind us, our house is littered with books. She ended up getting a master's of library science at University of South Carolina, and then became a librarian after she graduated, a reference librarian in particular. And so I married a librarian, and we met in grad school, and have been together ever since. Just celebrated our 25th anniversary about a month ago. Very nice.
Yeah.
Now I got to do math in my head. 97 I think I'm coming. It'll be 27 years. Next October, so I'm a year ahead of you.
Yeah, we're at that stage where we did a big event or big dinner out for the 20th and the big night out for the 25th, and then in between it's just sort of like,
life.
The 23rd is not a big anniversary.
Yeah, no doubt. Robert, can I put you on hold for 1 second? We'll come back and finish up the rest of your life. We're going to stand by. We're talking with Robert Moss, robertfmoss.com, and as we've just learned, is a computer consultant, and that's the lion's share of the business. Who knew? I thought barbecue was the lion's share of the business. I didn't even know he was doing computers. Maybe he's got some suggestions for me. We'll talk offline, Robert. I have a read for a Primo cooker right here. But forget about it. Sunday, it was going to be Saturday, but it ended up being Sunday. I ordered 2 racks of ribs from our pal Aaron Huntelman. He brought them over Saturday. Now, the worst part of the story is I was home and I didn't hear him ring the doorbell. So he dropped it off in the refrigerator, and then I went out a couple hours later and I was like, wow. Here I thought we were building this relationship, and he dropped the meat and ran again. What went wrong? But he told me, hey, look, car was there, rang the doorbell, blah, blah, blah. Who cares about any of that? Go right to the Primo, fire it up. I'm really learning how to capture the heat on the way up. So no overshooting, locked it right in around 270, 275. Rub the ribs down with Big Papa's Sweet Money. And then on to the cooker. Hit a few pieces of apple wood in there for wood smoke. Now, I filled a spray bottle with water and apple cider vinegar just for... The thought was to spritz every hour or so just to keep the bark nice and pliable. I'm not a big stiff bark guy on ribs. And what Nick Bauer told me the first time I cooked on the ceramic, said, wow, it appears to be a very humid environment. He said, yes, when the ceramics heat up, it does produce a humid environment. You're probably not going to need any spray or any mop or anything like that. So I paid attention this time out. No spray needed. The ribs were cooking perfectly, had the deflector plate in there, used normal lump charcoal by whatever brand. The thing hung in there, put them on at 1:30. At 5:15, they're coming off. Did a little wrap procedure about 3 hours into it just to tenderize them. Wow. This Primo is unbelievable. Next day, put all the unlit charcoal over to the side, dropped the lighter cube in there, did some reheat some of the ribs in the foil, but then also did 4 pieces of chicken. This thing's fabulous. I got so much charcoal left over, I can do another long cook if I wanted to, and I can just move the charcoal around, one side, both sides, split it up. You got to get one. I'm telling you right now, holiday season is here. Whoop-de-doo and dickory-dock. Get yourself a Primo. That doesn't rhyme. Only sold through dealers. PrimoGrill.com. That's PrimoGrill.com. Look at the ovals. They'll change your life. Take it from me. We're back with Robert Moss. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Howard Stern, Jim Rome, Dan Patrick, and Greg Rempe. The Mountain Rushmore of talk show entertainment. Now, let's get back to the Barbecue Central Show.
All right, welcome back. This portion of the show being brought to you by Fireboard. You can monitor up to 6 different temperatures simultaneously. You can connect to Wi-Fi for cloud-based monitoring. You can connect via Bluetooth if you'd like. If you have smart speakers in your home, Fireboard's fully integrated with most of those as well. Go to fireboard.com, call 816-945-2232. And in 2 weeks' time, Ted Conrad will be right here as we talk more about that Fireboard beacon that they were talking about releasing last time he was on about a month and a half ago. So stay tuned for that, and we're rejoined by Robert Moss. So we talked about you getting married. Any kids?
Yep, I have 2 kids, though they're hardly kids anymore. The oldest is just turned 23, and the youngest is 17. He's a senior in high school, so we've got basically 1 year left before we're empty nesters. So we now have two large boys, and the youngest is now like 6'2" and towers over me.
So we have similar aged kids. My oldest is going to be 23 this coming May, and I have one graduating high school this year as well. I also have one in the middle who's going to be graduating college a year early this coming spring. What's been the biggest reward and what's been the biggest challenge raising boys?
Oh, geez. I hadn't thought about that one. I mean, there are lots of challenges to it. I think, my older son is probably a lot like me, and it can be a challenge with just once he sort of got up. I think the hardest part is when it's a similar but different with the younger one. But when they get old enough to drive and hop in the car and disappear, I think with boys at least that there's a challenge there of just wanting. That balance between wanting to let them go and live their lives and fly on their own, but also realizing that, their brains just aren't developed yet in the things that they're doing. So it's a lot of worry behind the scenes, and then a lot of the occasional annoyances that come with teenage boys. I think that's the hardest thing. That and generally the general filthiness and squalor of teenage boys can be, it's like raising apes. So, but it's sort of just, I think it's waiting them out really, and dealing with young men without a lot of sense of responsibility or hygiene or things like that.
When you look back at specifically how your dad and your relationship was, and now you look at the relationship you have with your 2 sons, and quite honestly, you could have completely different relationships with your 2 sons. But looking back at your experience with your father and you being a father now, how do they compare and contrast?
That's a good question. I think they're similar in some ways. I think people, growing up in the 70s and 80s, parents they were not helicopter parents. At least there were very few helicopter parents, and and they tended to let kick you out of the house and let you go roam and spend a lot of time outside. So I think that my father in particular was very involved with us because my two brothers and I were very involved in a ton of activities, whether it was athletics or music or all that kind of stuff. And he was always driving us places and going on. We were all big into cross country and track, so going to track meets and things like that, and taking us to soccer practice and doing all this kind of things. So he was involved and engaged, but never really pushed us. And I think I've sort of taken a similar tack if I look at it, which is I've not, I've tried to support both boys in doing what they want to do, but not push them to be what I want them to be. Let them sort of develop on that and support. And it's hard at this day and age because with, cell phones and everything else, the temptation is to track people everywhere they go. So one of the hard things is just, as they get up, letting them go off and be on their own and develop a little bit without letting them, completely crash and fall off the high beam, if you will.
You don't track them on your phone?
I could, but I do not. No, I feel like that's and I don't think you need to. I think it creates nothing but anxiety on the parent's side and does not do anything to help build independence and self-confidence on the kids' side.
Are you paying for their cell phones still?
I am still paying for their cell phones, including the 23-year-olds, but only because I can add him as a line on my plan for really cheap, and it's just I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, I told my kids when you want us to stop having the ability to look at your location, you start paying for that phone. Oddly enough, I'm still able to track where their location is.
I can do it, and if I ever need to, I could if I really needed to find them. But as a general matter, I don't. I do a little bit of the la 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 la. I don't want to know what's happening, and which is probably the first. Well, with the 23-year-old son, I don't need to know where he is because there's nothing I can do about it. He's actually a musician. He's playing in bands. He's touring all over the Southeast now. So I'm just going to got to trust he'll be okay. The only reason I'm paying for the phone is because it would cost him a lot of money for him to get his own line compared to me paying $20 for it.
How do you break into the live fire world?
So I came into it from the academic side of things and from writing books. And I think without going into too much detail, I was in the computer business basically from 1997 and then moved down to Charleston in 2002 to get a job here at Blackballed, which is a big software company here. And then sort of spent 20 years rising up the ranks, becoming an executive and then jumped to another technology company. So I spent a lot, and that's a pretty intense time, so I spent a lot of time just, building that professional career. But along the side of doing all that, I still kept an interest in reading and research and all that. And as I was getting through my PhD at South Carolina, I got much more interested in history than I did literature. So I started reading a lot of history. I was eating a lot of barbecue. I got really interested in old barbecue joints and was driving around and eating barbecue and a lot of other things, just sort of classic old restaurants. And so while I finished up my dissertation and got my PhD, while I was working in the computer industry, but just as sort of a hobby, I said, well, what's my next project going to be? I wanted to work on some kind of research project is on the side. And so I said, I want to go to the library. I went to the University of South Carolina Library, which has millions of books, back a research library, and said, I'll find a book on history of barbecue and read that. That should be good. And there wasn't a book on the history of barbecue. The best I could find was, and I had spent a lot, many years doing very detailed historical research, more on the literary side of things. And so I started looking into it, and there have been people who had written books about like history of food with a couple pages on barbecue, and there have been some books written about like restaurants in the 20th century, but almost nobody had written anything about the 19th century barbecue. And I decided, well, I'll research into that more. So I started taking some of the same techniques I'd learned in studying literary history and started digging into culinary history, and discovered that there's a huge world of barbecue in the 19th century and back to the colonial era, and found more and more and more. And I said, okay, well, I guess I need to write that book. And it took me 10 years. It wasn't published until 2010. But I finally got it out there. Since then, a number of people have written additional barbecue histories, but that was the first book that treated it in depth, and the first book to really dig into the 19th century and 18th century. And so that sort of got me into culinary history. Along the way, as that book was finishing up, and it takes a while for it to go through the process, I started writing a food blog. This was after I'd moved to Charleston. Charleston has a great dining scene. I happened to move here right as that dining scene was really taking off and getting national and then international attention. And so I was just writing a food blog in the early days of blogs, back in the Blogger platform, back when you could do that. And actually, there was no Twitter at that point. There was no social media. But blogs were very exciting, and you could have conversations with people and share links and all that kind of stuff. And so I started writing this food blog. It was mostly about just restaurants and things I was eating. And then from that, I got in touch with the editor of the Charleston City paper, got in touch with me and said, we need food writers, like your blog, you're interested in it. So I started writing some stuff for them, became one of their 2 restaurant critics, and then became their senior restaurant critic, reviewing restaurants here in Charleston. The barbecue book came out, and so I started writing more about barbecue, for the city paper here, but then for other publications. It just sort of grew organically, if you will, until Hunter Lewis, who at the time was the managing editor of Southern Living, and I sort of ran into each other. We were seated at the same table at a Charleston Wine and Food event here, and struck up a conversation. And he was like, "Well, you're trying to do more barbecue coverage at Southern Living. Maybe you like to write for us." And then, the rest, it sort of developed into the contributing barbecue editor gig, and that's sort of how I got into it.
Is that a contractor's position? The editor?
Yeah, for me now, and that's why it says contributing barbecue editor.
Yeah.
When they first had me come on board, Daniel Vaughn had just been hired as the barbecue editor at Texas Monthly. And I really wanted them to make me the senior barbecue editor at Southern Living, because I thought that'd just be a great way to really stick it to Daniel. But it turns out you can't do that, because if you're going to have that title, you have to be a full-time staff member. A barbecue editor.
Just for a title?
Yeah, the titles are very important in the journalism, in the world of journalism, in magazines, because they don't, there's not a lot else. Titles and plaques are very big. They're very big on reward ceremonies and things like that.
Not a lot of money.
So I couldn't. If you can't make money, you can at least get a nice plaque out of it. But so I couldn't be the senior barbecue editor, so I had to be the contributing barbecue editor, because that indicates that I'm not a full-time staffer. I am a freelancer, independent contractor. I just get paid per piece. But we have a regular gig, but I'm not I don't get a salary. I get paid each time I write something.
It's funny that both you and Daniel follow a similar track, in that his whole scene started around, I forget what the name was, Full Custom Gospel Barbecue.
Custom Gospel Barbecue. Yeah, he started off blogging. He was specifically barbecue, reviewing barbecue joints. Yeah. I was more general restaurants, talking about restaurants, but barbecue was among them. But yeah, and that was how a lot of people got into the business in 2005 to 2010, was through the blogging route.
How have you seen the journalism and writing world change over the time you've been doing it?
Yeah, I'll try not to get too despairing on it, because I think it's pretty bleak. It's changed for the worse, for sure. There was a short window of 20 years maybe where there was a lot of money in newspapers and magazines. This is before Craigslist, and so classified ads were just a hose full of money into your typical local newspapers. There was no Instagram. Brands advertised in magazines, full page, glossy photos. I mean, there was lots of money, revenue flowing in. At a time where there was a lot of consolidation in the industry. Most cities used to have 2, 3, 4 daily papers. They all consolidated until there was one. So there was this period where the local daily had a lock on the market. The magazines really were big, and you had your big brand magazines could really charge top rates, and then they could really afford to pay writers a lot of money. So, and then I got into it. It's curious that the blogs was sort of the route that Daniel and I and others have got into it, through that blogging route, because that was a way for you to sort of break into writing without having to actually get through the gatekeeper of an editor. I started submitting things well before I started doing the blog. I would write a piece and you'd submit it, and it would sit, you never hear anything back. And it was really hard to get published, the first time. Blogging lets you get up and sort of cut your teeth. But it allowed a lot more people into the industry. And so at a time, it looked like, oh, this is this great new channel. It's going to let a lot of things into it. But then the step by step, the revenue model of newspapers and magazines has just been broken by the internet or swiped away by the internet. And magazines and newspapers are all just really cutting corners and everything else. So the internet is a very difficult place. I think lots of newspapers and magazines have kept pivoting. They would pivot to video. They would pivot to this. They would pivot to that. As social media became the front door to the internet, and you had to break through the noise. And that's where clickbait and lists and all that stuff has come from. And the markets for paying, if you want to make money writing about food, it's harder and harder and harder, and the checks are smaller and smaller. So it's not something that I think there's a million content creators now around food. And there's not a whole lot of people making any money doing it. So it's not something I would consider a great career for people. It's a great hobby if you enjoy doing it. There's a great way to do it, but it's not a great way to pay a mortgage and raise a family and put them through school and all that good stuff.
Are you concerned with leaving any type of legacy behind you?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you don't write stuff and launch it out in the world unless you want people to read it and you want to, them to sort of remember your name. To me, I think the books ultimately, hopefully, will be a legacy on the food writing side of things. I think that those are the things that will last the longest. I don't know how long the barbecue history or my Southern food histories will last, but they'll be relevant for a while. But I think it's I think it's less like a legacy in the sense that I want to be remembered and have like statues and things like that. But I would like to have something live after me that like a book on the shelf that someone down the road may pick up and read and find value in. That would be a nice legacy.
You've known him for a decent amount of time now as the 9:35 guest, the second Tuesday of the month, giving us great information on barbecue. And now you know way more about our pal Robert Moss, the origin story here as we come to conclusion. Robert, appreciate the time here this evening. Anything else you'd like to mention or promote as we head out of here?
Nothing to promote right now. Or mention. I do appreciate the ring and the guest Hall of Fame nod. That was very nice, and I do want to look forward to when I come back. I lots of thoughts coming back from the Jack and coming back, and then all the American Royal stuff about KCBS and barbecue competitions and all that. So. Yeah, not a subject for today, but maybe for December we can weigh in on that because I've been thinking a lot about barbecue competitions in the past few weeks.
All right, we'll put that in for December's outline and some other things as well. This is our pal Robert Moss, robertfmoss.com, the website. Robert, appreciate the extended time tonight, and we'll see you in December.
All right, thanks, Greg. I appreciate it.
You got it. Robert Moss right there. And happy Thanksgiving, by the way, Ron. Great extended segment, yes, and we've learned a lot more about Robert than we ever knew before, which I certainly appreciate. All right, we're going to catch up here, hopefully, and do a nice top of the second hour intro. So stick around, and we'll be right back.
Continuing to produce incredibly mediocre content in an exceptionally professional way. You're listening and watching the Barbecue Central Show. Once again, here's your host, Greg Rempe.
And we thank Robert Moss for joining us last segment. robertfmoss.com is the website, a 2023 Barbecue Central Show's guest Hall of Famer. Yes, indeedy. One of what will be 4, hopefully, origin stories as we race through the next handful of months. Again, we don't do Rusty Monson because Rusty Monson did an origin story a couple of years ago when we first started rolling these out. So hopefully you enjoyed that extended peek into the world and life of our pal Robert Moss, second Tuesday of the month regular guest in the 35 past the hour segment. Right, we are heading to the second hour where we have a great 60 minutes of barbecue-related content for you, amongst other things. So stick around, refresh your libations, and we'll be right back.